So hello everyone and welcome to my talk on how to start your analytics engineering team. I want to take a quick second just to say thank you to all the speakers who've already presented over the past few days. A lot has really resonated with me and it's so exciting to hear everyone's different perspectives. So first I wanted to start this off with a quick about me. So my name's Andres and I'm located in Philadelphia. Today I'll primarily be drawing from my experiences over the past 4 years. I spent 3 years at La Colombe building out a data team and I spent the past year helping build up analytics engineering as a practice at GoPuff. I'll also be drawing on some of what I've seen as DBT and the community around it has evolved over that time frame as well. And in preparing for this talk, I took a little stroll down memory lane and was able to find a couple of fun facts I wanted to share from my time working with DBT and the Fishtown team. So I've been using DBT since 5.2, and for fun, I started looking at the Slack archives. I found my very first DBT Slack post, and it's wild to think that my opinion hasn't changed one bit. I'll never forget that this DBT John is the bee's knees, as I so elegantly put it 4 years ago. I was also shocked to find out that Drew and I just missed our DBT Slack DM anniversary. My first message to him was just a big SQL file that I asked him to fix, so it's about time that I repay him for that favor. As a peasant, I dug up a little throwback, this logo of the predecessor of DBT Cloud, Sinter. I'm pretty sure Drew came up with the name, and I still don't really understand what Sinter means, but I wish I could go back to saying my job is just sintering data. I do remember that Drew explained it to me once, so maybe he can explain it to all of you in the Coalesce Start AE Team DBT Slack channel for this talk. Anyways, it's really exciting to think how far this project in this space has come in just a few years, and I can't wait to see where it'll be a few years from now. So on to the main show. There's 3 big questions that I'm going to try and answer for you all today. When do I need an analytics engineering team is the first. I think this is a really important thing to ask. I'm not at all here to tell you that every organization needs or will benefit from a dedicated analytics engineering team. Next, how do I convince folks we need one? I also found it important to determine how to convince other people of something I've already concluded. Having been immersed in DBT in the community for as long as I have, I take some of these things for granted in our communal understanding of data that aren't necessarily understood by others without some explanation. And third, how do we succeed once we've started it? Starting a team is actually pretty easy, but making it a successful team is much harder and is probably the most important step. So to start off here, so when do you need an analytics engineering team? So it depends. You actually ask yourself a couple more questions. So first, do we have enough analytics engineering work for 2 or more people full-time? This is a little pedantic, but team implies more than one person. So analytics engineering team implies a focus on analytics engineering for multiple people. In many organizations, you might be able to get away with analytics engineering just being a competency that other folks, such as data engineers or analysts, embody. So just keep this in mind. Next, is our data team's organizational structure suited for it? A team focused on analytics engineering implies a level of sophistication to your data infrastructure and strategy. That might mean you have or are planning to build dedicated teams for data engineering, analytics, BI, etc. An analytics engineering team in a silo won't be very successful, so it's important to make sure that we have all the building blocks in place for it to succeed. And third, do we have data engineers, data scientists, analysts, business intelligence folks who will actually benefit from an analytics engineering team? If you're having resourcing issues up or downstream of the analytics engineering team, you might not realize all of the benefits. I like to think there might exist an ideal ratio between data folks. Let's just say 1 data engineer to 1 analytics engineer to 3 BI or analyst folks. If we use that as a rough guide, if you don't plan on having a total data team of at least 10 people large, this might not even be worth considering. So if you answered yes to all of these, an analytics engineering team might be a good fit for your organization. So to go a little further here, I wanted to present 2 case studies from my past and current roles to help illustrate this a little further. So first, an example where an analytics engineering team wasn't needed. This is from our prior role leading the data team at La Colombe Coffee Roasters. So although the organization was growing quickly, the data team never grew to a point of meaningful separation and specialization. This might not be true for your company, especially if it's in tech or e-commerce, but there are many organizations where there's a realistic cap on tech headcount. A mid-sized consumer packaged good company such as La Colombe is typically going to have a limit on how many tech folks they hire. And this is okay. Some teams and organizations function much better in a group where everyone is a master of none. This didn't hinder our productivity, and it actually enhanced it. There was a lot of value in our small teams being able to jump across technical domains to solve problems and not be specialized. This is going to be a similar situation for early to mid-stage companies. Your growth will likely outpace the team size you'll have. So for some further thoughts on structuring data teams, especially smaller ones, I thought David's talk yesterday was actually excellent on the topic. So for me, a lot of this really boils down to one possibly controversial opinion. Until someone's focus is at least 80% in a specific domain, carving out a specific team for them to live in will either be too limiting or just a misnomer. We just didn't have team scale or enough analytics engineering work to justify a dedicated team, however critical analytics engineering was to our success at La Colombe. Ultimately, an analytics engineering team just didn't make sense at La Colombe. So moving on to our next case study, the flip side. We did need to establish an analytics engineering team at my current company, GoPuff. So although our data team isn't huge, it's certainly getting pretty big. There's over 20 folks now dedicated to data. Without a broken out team focused on analytics engineering, this meant there wasn't a lot of coordination around building a single source of truth in our data warehouse. We had two main problems to solve for. Problem one, analysts couldn't specialize and level up their skills in an analytics domain or a business unit. Everyone was constantly context switching between business units and layers of the stack, and it's just really exhausting. And this is going to bite you in a few ways. Many data folks won't feel fulfilled just jumping around constantly, and there isn't as much room for focusing on higher order data problems. The second problem, team output was just limited. Without a core set of analytics-ready data, deep dive analysis or BI reporting takes a while. When analysts have to pour their time into basic reporting and analysis, or end users don't have a solid self-service platform, it really detracts from your team's time. So our solution, to meaningfully separate out analytics, business intelligence, and the team responsible for maintaining the team clean data all behind it, analytics engineering. So just bringing it all together, if you're a mid-sized to larger organization with over 10 people focused on data and have or are building teams with specific data competencies, you might be a good candidate for an analytics engineering team. I think the final question to ask yourself is, who do you think should fundamentally own our analytics engineering code base? I don't think there's any right answers here at all. The answer might be the entire data team. It might be a few teams throughout the organization. It might be an existing team such as data engineering. However, if you think the answer is that one team should own it, and that team should have multiple people focused on it, I think you could certainly benefit from having a dedicated analytics engineering team. So great, we've done a bit of self-reflection, and we've convinced ourselves that we need an analytics engineering team. So now how do we convince others, especially those who don't even know what analytics engineering is? And so for me, it comes down to something simple. Break it down to terms everyone can understand, and that's value. So what is the value that an analytics engineering team brings? First, it allows folks to specialize and become experts. It also means that people are able to focus their time solving gnarly problems, such as what are the real drivers of AOV in the business, or what's the best way to build this dashboard in Looker? These are domain-specific problems that require expertise, just like our work in analytics engineering. Second, it means we're going to get more done collectively. In my unscientific observations of what our analysts are working on, up to 50% and sometimes more of time's folks who spent wasted on things that a fully built out analytics engineering practice can solve for. As the analytics engineering team gets ramped up, this time starts to come back to the team. And finally, and what I've been giving a lot of thought to recently is that it makes hiring more streamlined and tactical. I think this is especially true for analyst roles, which, as we all may know, are typically generic and vague. You can start to think a lot more critically about the skill gaps in different parts of your data organization and start aligning resources to them. I think there's certainly benefits to hiring more master of none type folks, but I think this has diminishing returns for larger organizations. So I can't get any audience feedback right now, but I'm going to assume all 4,000 of you are nodding your heads and are completely sold on this idea of me starting an analytics engineering team. So now comes the hard part. How do we succeed? I'll preface this portion by saying our team at GoPuff is only a few months old, and we've had our fair share of successes, failures, and learnings. So diving right in. I challenge you to rethink data at your organization. Take this as an opportunity as an analytics leader to give thought to the design and structure of all of your data teams. I think one of the biggest mistakes you can make in starting an analytics engineering team is not changing the way adjacent teams work, or at the very least thinking about it if there's something to improve on. As I mentioned before, analytics engineering in a silo won't be successful, so make sure it's in an ecosystem that it can thrive in. Also, consider how data is being used. No matter how new or old your company is, bad data habits certainly exist. To the extent possible, find them and end them. Chances are you won't be able to completely eradicate them, but the more you fix and improve now, the more you'll be thanking yourself in the future. And finally, remember that there isn't an ideal team structure. We're experiencing rapid growth in the data space, and we'll all look back and laugh in 10 years from now what we were even doing today. So just do the best that you can with some critical thought. Next, I think it's really important to define your charter. Think carefully about what analytics engineering will do and what they own as a team. At GoPuff, I'd say analytics engineering is responsible for building and maintaining the single source of truth for the organization in a data warehouse. but you'll need to figure out what makes sense for your organization. And I can't emphasize this enough, but formalizing this matters. Write it down on paper, edit it, get buy-in, and publish it for everyone to see. Failure to do this will lead to conflict. While you're at it, do the same thing for all adjacent teams. Ambiguity between roles and responsibility means that no one owns it. The ball will get dropped and there will be duplicative efforts and mistakes will get made. This one might be very obvious, but focus on analytics engineering. This isn't the 10th annual analytics engineering conference. This is a new field and it's up to us to start developing it. We need to figure out what best practice in the space is and what works and what doesn't. Similarly, since no one's been doing it for that long, we should be focusing on leveling up and growing individuals. In this vein, analytics engineers, and probably you in particular, are skilled across the data space. It can be really hard to focus less on non-analytics engineering skills. Even today, in my current sprint is filled with non-analytics engineering work, which is slowing down progress on our core analytics engineering goals. But remember, time not spent focused on developing the new analytics engineering team in practice is time that you're losing. Yesterday, Ashley from JetBlue mentioned how important engineers focusing on doing engineering was, and that really resonated with me. I always go back to one of the core principles of analytics engineering, which is to bring software engineering best practice to the analytics space. Good software development teams focus on software development, and I think the same certainly holds true for us. So next, I'd really recommend adopting Agile or some form of development methodology. Yesterday, I really enjoyed Jacob's talk on lessons in prioritization, and I agree with how valuable it is. Having a framework around how your team scopes out, prioritizes, and execute work is so important. I view what analytics engineers build as a data product, and we should treat it as we do other products from your organization. From personal experience and after a ton of reluctance, I found it's actually a lot easier than you think to move to a sprint model. Analytics engineering was kind of built for it. Our data modeling work is structured around building discrete and reusable components, so mapping those out into tickets and building a backlog or roadmap isn't that hard. Especially in a situation where there's a lot of legacy code to be fixed or a ton of new features coming at you, having this documented helps communicate if your team is having resource constraints as well. Personally, I find the hardest part is that it forces you to think critically about the work you're going to do and whether your team should even be doing it. From my past, a lot of data and analytics work has been shooting from the hip, jumping from high priority to high priority project as the wind blows. Reflection and planning is tough stuff, but it actually pays off. And as a last thought here, just remember that if you fail, it's really easy to go back. I just recommend you give some thought, some structure to your work a shot, especially if it's something your core engineering team works with. This was true at GoPuff, and it certainly helped us align with our engineering team. So this one's less analytics engineering team focused and probably just good career advice for everyone in general, but prioritize high impact and visible projects. You're a new team, show those who backed you the value it can bring. In the early days, it's important to move in a fast and focused manner to prove out the concept and encourage continued growth of the team. Here I've listed out some simple examples that analytics engineering can help out with. Let your team be the one to take credit for it. So for example, a report that used to take 10 minutes, we got it taking only 1 minute now. That's awesome. That job that failed randomly and stopped reporting from working, we migrated to dbt and fixed it. You're now letting your consumers know when the data is stale or wrong instead of waiting for them to tell you. Just think along the same lines as if you were starting a new job and wanted to make a splash to impress. This is exactly what you want your team to do. And this might be one of the most valuable areas to focus of them all, and that's identifying the right people. You might be starting out as just one full-time analytics engineer that needs to build out the team and competency. So think long and hard about who else should join you. Do you need a counterpart who's fairly experienced with analytics engineering and dbt, or are you trying to mentor someone? Just like with starting a company, the first few hires are critical to success or failure. These decisions will shape the future of the team, so really focus on it. And keep in mind that sometimes the right folks already exist in your organization, but sometimes they don't. Remember that an analytics engineer is not the same as a data analyst, and it's not the same as a data engineer. You might have data folks in the organization already, but this definitely requires more thought than just reallocating resources across teams. This is kind of the same thing as a back-end engineering team needing a new member, so the engineering organization just shifts a front-end resource to them. You might be tempted to do this and it might work, but you should think really critically about it before you do. Next, I'd really recommend cleaning up your reporting layer. So as data people, especially those of us responsible for data integrity, we really want to avoid the dreaded "these numbers don't match" comment about reporting. If you're a mid-sized or larger company, chances are that you have a reporting layer with countless reports that have non-analytics engineering dependencies. You'll want to fix that. In many tools like Looker, it's easy to do dependency tracking, swap in the new for the old, and identify unused reporting. Just simplify what's needed. And depending on your organization, this might not be your responsibility, but it certainly might be your problem. Having a dirty reporting layer will cause churn for your new team and impact productivity. And for my last slide on the topic, you'll really want to focus on explaining your team to non-data folks. I'm sure everyone else has been called a numbers or data person, and that used to really bug me, but now I'm actually kind of glad. To many people, we're ultimately just problem solvers. From experience, I've told people that I'm starting an analytics engineering team, and their eyes just glaze over. I can't emphasize this enough. The term means absolutely nothing to people who aren't in this space. The gut reaction folks might have to new teams is just more bureaucracy and having to wait longer for their requests and questions to be solved. Don't let that sit in. Once I've explained my team, how folks will interact with it and the value it can bring, people get excited about how things can improve for them. And so finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention GoPuff is hiring. Take a look on our website for more information if you're interested, or reach out to me directly via the DBT Slack. And thank you so much for attending the talk, and I'd be happy to answer a couple questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andres. As you mentioned, we do have a few minutes for questions, so keep them coming in the Slack. We'll keep Andres on the screen. There we go. So first question for you, what has been the hardest part about starting this analytics engineering team for you at GoPuff?
Yeah, I think probably the hardest thing, which, I mentioned this in the presentation, was, communicating and explaining folks the value of AE. So I think for a lot of people, perhaps in this conference already, like you get AE or analytical engineering, as we call it AE at GoPuff. It's a very valuable skill set and a valuable thing to have in an organization. I really struggled in the early days just explaining to folks like why this matters, because for me, for so long, it just kind of clicked. Yeah. So working on my communication and ability to like really just show people like the value it can bring was certainly the hardest thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And how have you found that hiring piece? I haven't been in the position of hiring an analytics engineer, and I'm curious what that feels like today. Is there a shortage? Is it people knocking down your door? How does that feel as a hiring manager?
Yeah, no, I will say, and this is good news for folks on the call, it definitely feels like a shortage to a degree. One of the things, this isn't exclusively what I screen for, but when I see DBT experience pop up, it's like a light goes on. I mean, our Slack group's pretty big now. I think there's almost 10,000 folks, but not everyone there is looking for a job. And if you're not in that Slack channel, you probably aren't using DBT. So it actually has been kind of hard to find folks. We've been lucky enough to find one person so far to fill in the role. I think we want to get to the point, and I mentioned this in the presentation, I want to mentor folks at a point. We found it early on that first hire, we really wanted someone else who had a good core foundation in the space, had been in it for a while. But I also think it's our responsibility in starting this kind of team to bring mentorship to it as well and grow people to, someday understand it as we do.
Yeah, I totally love that. I think I agree. I feel like there's a shortage, and sort of recognizing that and realizing if I invest in people, I'm sort of investing in the whole ecosystem is a really cool framing. Have you mentored someone sort of and grown them into this analytics engineering role beforehand? And if so, what do you think the best ways that people can sort of either like self-teach or the things that were really useful to help train someone else into this role?
Yeah, so at my last organization, La Colombe, and as well as at GoPuff, there are folks who have slowly moved into more of this analytics engineering role. I'd say most folks have just taken it on as, they have their main role, and analytics engineering has just been a core component of changing the way of, how they do things. I found that, one, introducing them to the community and getting them involved has been probably the most valuable thing. I think this is one of those things where as soon as it clicks for you, you're like, wow, this changes everything. But before then, it's a little hard to internalize and understand, like, why am I writing these models? Why does this, all work this way? And so having people, having this community where folks can go ask questions and get them answered and they can be immersed in it, I found has been probably the most valuable and helpful part of mentoring them.
To everyone watching, I promise we didn't practice that question. We didn't have that one lined up, but I'm glad to hear it for sure. And when you are hiring these more junior people, what do you sort of look for? If you don't have experience as a requirement, what are the things that you think are an indicator that this person is someone you can grow into the role?
Yeah, that's definitely a great question. I think that one, and I guess it depends the level at which you want to mentor people. For me, I definitely look for folks who already have a strong technical background, ideally working with, a data warehousing solution such as Redshift or Snowflake. So they can already understand like how to write clever SQL in a tool like that. I'd say one other really important component as well has been just identifying folks who have kind of a keen eye for automation or just like doing things better. So they've recognized in their own lives, like, wow, like I've had to rewrite this query a bajillion times, but I don't know a better way. And so being able to show them that better way and help them grow, I found identifying folks who kind of have that thread has been good as well.
Yeah, awesome. A question from the Slack. Let me just read through it. So if you could pick one skill, what is the absolute non-negotiable skill that an analytics engineer must possess to be successful in their role?
I think the one non-negotiable, and maybe this won't always be the case, but I do think it is that strong SQL foundation. I think if you don't have a strong foundation in SQL and essentially the code that you're writing, right? It's kind of almost like asking if, can you be a developer without knowing a programming language? And I'd say the answer is probably not.
Yeah.
Until maybe we get drag and drop GUIs for doing everything, but I think we're a ways away from that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I spoke at a conference recently, and like it's to me, it's so clear how SQL is like the foundation upon which we build all the other technical skills. If you're not using code, you can't version control it, you can't do the next thing, you can't do the next thing. And I think about 50% of people in the room weren't comfortable writing SQL at a data conference. And I was like, that's wild. So yeah, there was a discussion yesterday, SQL versus Python. And I think I'm still in the SQL camp being the non-negotiable skill. Awesome. So we have a few more questions coming in the Slack, but I'm going to close it up here. Thanks again, Andres.
Thank you, Claire.